So yes, what I love about your book is that you bring in some, very, very impressive figures in history like Plato and just ancient figures and ancient stories like the epic, the story of Gilgamesh. But then you make it very digestible and very accessible in a very, just plain spoken language. And so I think it's great to fuse those two approaches. But I guess related to, Dave played a clip from current day. You quote a lot from Martin Luther King Jr. and you say that he influenced your work heavily. And there's a quote that you included. He says that all segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregated a false sense of inferiority, and it gives the segregated a false sense of what was the word? Like inferiority. Sorry, inferiority. Do you think that we're kind of doing that now? Do we have almost like a new neo-segregation in what's happening? Because, we're seeing some college graduations, for example, or dorms that certain races are not allowed to enter. When I was a journalist, I reported over in, I think it was Oregon. They had certain public areas that white people were not allowed to be in. And then, some daycares are having events that white children are not allowed to go to these events. Do you think we're kind of experiencing that, but in a new way? And what do you think that's doing to our culture?
Well, I think that you are very correct to identify that as a central theme and quote to my entire book. I wouldn't go so far as to say that we're living in a new era of segregation, but I'll tell you why that quote means so much to me. You're right. Martin Luther King says segregation hurts both parties. It hurts the segregated by making them feel inferior, a false sense of inferiority. And it hurts the segregator as well by deforming their soul and giving them a false sense of superiority. And Dr. King is getting this idea from Socrates. Socrates says that virtue, living a life in accordance with justice and having a just soul, is its own reward, whereas a vicious soul, a person that walks around and is malicious and callous and unkind to others, that's a symptom of a vicious soul. That's its own punishment because that's sickness of the soul. So people who are cruel, they don't deserve our contempt and disdain. They deserve our compassion, our empathy, because they're clearly experiencing a sickness of the soul, whether they realize it or not. And they're suffering, whether they realize it or not. They're hurting themselves by acting viciously, whether they realized it or not. So that's where Dr. King, that's the intellectual well where he's drawing from. And I borrow from Socrates and Dr. King and analogize that idea to civility. We underappreciate today that incivility is mutually harmful. We hear a lot of apocalyptic rhetoric across the political spectrum where people say, we have to be willing to pull the gloves off and be willing to do anything in order to beat the other side. The other side is an existential threat to who we are, and they are so bad, so evil, so wrong that they can't be reasoned with. They cannot be. We can't engage in persuasion with them anymore. We have to be willing to just beat them and destroy them. Own the lives. All of this sort of apocalyptic zero-sum language of war. And what people insufficiently appreciate today that, we hear nice guys finish last, and you have to be willing to be a bully and a strong man in order to get ahead. But there's no actually being a strong man and a tyrant and getting ahead. There's no being uncivil and actually winning, at least not according to Socrates, Dr. King, and many, many other thoughtful people. Because when we are cruel and malicious and harm and dehumanize another human being, yes, we hurt them. But we also hurt ourselves too. We debase our own soul. We inflame our inner tyrants. Our inner Gilgamesh is an idea that I unpack in the book. This part of our soul that has a lust to hurt and harm others that we have to restrain every moment of every day. And so when we feed that, it does hurt us as well. We insufficiently appreciate that. There's no taking the gloves off and winning at any cost. That when we hurt others, when we're uncivil and kind, we hurt ourselves too. And conversely, when we are gracious, when we're hospitable, when we forgive, that is mutually ennobling, though engaging in those acts of civility. So just as incivility is mutually harmful, civility is mutually ennobling.
Well, but I think part of the problem is that Martin Luther King and Socrates didn't live in our current day environment when you have social media and everyone is in these bubbles. And again, we're not naming names here, but certain people are going to get away with as much as they can. And the fact is that when people make comments like that, things that again, any other politician would have had his career ended uh, long ago, and people not only don't stand up, but they just shrug. They just let it run off. So it becomes an accepted part of our discourse. And that's why, again, I still didn't really hear you answer the question, but what if there's one or two things that we can do based on your principles? If you could have one or two things that we could change or adapt to our political system, to our government, that would have the biggest impact towards achieving your goals, what would they be?
I mean, one, don't support strongmen, people who use inflammatory rhetoric, people who use threats and coercion, and who adopt those sort of mentality.
Well, tell that to Kerry and the Republican base.
That sort of mentality. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, that's the beauty of democracy, that we can support leaders who reflect our values. That's totally our prerogative to do. That is absolutely within our control. Second, that's like looking outward, but the other one is looking inward. What are we doing in our everyday? How can we do a better job of seeing, knowing, and loving the countless anonymous people that we meet in our everyday, the people close to us, our family and friends? How are we creating, front porches that foster civility and incubate community and hospitality in our very broken, very divided, very atomized time? We are in a crisis of alienation and isolation right now. Hannah Arendt, she said that when there is existential loneliness in a society, that is when a society is most prone to strongmen and to tyrants.
I agree.
That was her observation about the rise of Adolf Hitler. And so what can we do? Like, no public leader can be elected and then, foster friendship in America. Like, there's no that's something beyond the purview of public policy and law. And that's something that we each have a role to play of helping our fellow citizens, our fellow human beings feel seen, known, and loved. Creating space for trust and friendship and relationship. That is, and this is exactly what my book is about, that there's so much that is so important in human life that is beyond the scope of government and law, but that is where so much of our public discourse wants to be. and in my opinion, it shouldn't be. It's inordinately focused on that when some of the most important subject matter and realms of human life are way beyond the scope of government politics and law.
I agree with that. I think it really is cultural, and the cultural norms that we allowed. Because the thing about Trump that I don't hear a lot of folks talk about is he was a celebrity for decades before he became president. And it was the culture of Hollywood and the culture of embracing the type of language that now people are clutching their pearls. Well, where were you when he was doing all those things? You were giving him multi-million-dollar contracts. Steven Spielberg, Barbara Walters, buying condos in Trump Tower, or Oprah giving him a huge platform. So he's the same person that he was before. It's just that our culture enabled him and his rhetoric and the cheating and all that. So I think that it is ultimately cultural. I do agree with you, Lexi. I really do. And I think that, culturally, if you look at the type of content coming out of Hollywood today versus, like, let's say in Dwight Eisenhower's time, culturally, and I'm not saying government censorship should happen, but culturally, that sort of content just wouldn't be accepted in American culture back then. So, and it's interesting because when I say things like that, like, oh, well, you just want to take us back to the 50s and you want segregation, you want no women's rights. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, you can keep the baby and, throw out the bathwater. You can say, I support the Civil Rights Act. I support women's rights, but I also support a culture that is civil and that is, actually culturally has norms that are not crass, but you reap what you sow. And that's what I find kind of ironic coming from Hollywood, which is predominantly leftist.
Well, I think, again, I would just say, if you look, I grew up in New York City, so I've known not personally, but certainly through almost every other means, Donald Trump my entire life. And he was a very different person. He would maybe go after Rosie O'Donnell. Okay, that was the extent of his negative attacks. But when you go over, and by the way, when you're president of the United States, you're supposed to be president for everybody. And so this is the kind of thing, though. But again, you always hear it. He's a victim of circumstance. He's the victim. This is the way he's.
I'm not saying he's a victim. I'm saying he is the product.
As he will get away with. And
he's the
this
product,
is the
not
thing.
the victim.
Okay. Anyway, this is the thing, Lexi, is that when you're dealing with, and this is not just Trump, but there are a lot of people who are like pathological narcissists, and they're incapable of empathy. They're incapable of the introspection. They're incapable of admitting that they're wrong, and they're incapable of the accountability that you need, in my opinion, to be civil. So if you're missing some of the ingredients, how can you bake the pie?
Well, one thing I will say about our current moment, and Christ said it better and first, we live in this culture of blame where we want to pinpoint, one technology, one epiphenomena, one leader, and like, this is the cause, right? And Christ said, why are you looking at the speck in your brother's eye when you have a log in your own? Like it's really cathartic. Like, I think we have a lot of pent up emotional energy and stuff which is why we relish the sort of gladiatorial ethos of public discourse and public life right now. It's like the Romans had Christians being thrown to the lions and gladiators tearing one another apart. And we love seeing, our public leaders lay into one another. Like, it's not all that different. And it inflames like the ugly base part of the soul that we share and that the Romans had, 2,000 years ago. And that's why my theory of social change is hyper individual, and it is local. And it's saying, we're not going to blame Donald Trump. We're not going to blame Twitter and Elon Musk. We're not going to blame Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. We're going to say, like, what can we do given the world that is, not the world that we wish there was? What are we going to do to be a part of the solution? And to be quite frank with you, I think Carrie's right that it's a misdiagnosis to pinpoint any one of these epiphenomena, any one leader, any one technology, because this challenge again is timeless. It's always existed. It's part of the human condition. So it's a misdiagnosis to pinpoint pinpoint one entity today. This challenge of civility preexisted these people, these technologies, and they will exist. This challenge will exist after they have fallen to the wayside as well. And so I think it's helpful to focus on what we can control. What are we doing? What are you doing, Dave, to be a part of the solution to this problem in your everyday? Not just what you're saying on television and podcasts, but like how you're living your life, how you're building community wherever you go, because that's our responsibility. That's the most important. Like, I believe that as a mother. I wrote this book. This book is my third child, and I'm proud of it. I love sharing it with the world, but I know that the best thing that I'll ever do for the world is to create good humans and to be a good mom, the best mom I can be to my kids. And that's always my absolute priority for that reason.
That is a wonderful, upbeat note on which to end. Lexi, I so admire your work. We need more people out there doing what you're doing. As Carrie knows, I'm a glass is half full kind of guy. So I really applaud what you're doing, and best of luck. And hopefully we will see you again soon. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much to you both for having me.
Thanks, Lexi. Take care.
Thanks for joining us again on another episode of Practically Political. We look forward to seeing you back with us soon. I'm Dave Spencer. Have a great day.